You're listening to Security Pro Insights. When it comes to social media, many of us feel it's completely harmless, especially the employees of our organization. However, it's known that what an employee posts, even in personal time or as a personal gesture, often can have a direct impact to the organization they work for. Today's guest, Phillip Tully, is here to share some of the threats posed by the actions taken of employees with their own social media feeds and the threats it may pose to your organization. Phillip, I want to welcome you to the show. I thank you for taking time with us today. Let's start by telling the guest a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Scott, and thanks for having me on. It's my pleasure. So, my name is Phillip Tully. I am a data scientist at the cybersecurity company called ZeroFox. ZeroFox is located in Baltimore, Maryland, and is primarily concerned with dealing with cyber threats and cybersecurity issues stemming from social media. In a past life, I came from a more academic background, academic world. I did a PhD in computer science where I studied applications of big data, and I tried to understand how memories are stored in the brain. So I dealt with lots of data and spiking biological data. And now more and more, I'm looking more at the world of social media and dealing with text data and image data and trying to scour these different social and digital channels to find threats that are facing enterprises, individuals like executives, employees, and brands.
So it sounds like it all started with numbers. I'm assuming you're a numbers guy to go down that particular avenue at the beginning.
Right. A lot of the stuff I did earlier in my career were computational experiments. Using data that already existed and trying to create models that accounted for some of the results that experimentalists were getting in their labs and using them to make predictions about what experiments should be performed next. In the same way, this is how data science works, especially in the cybersecurity world. There are many threats out there that you can create models for. And the better you understand the threats that have already happened, the better able you are and the better suited you are to be able to predict the next threat that comes in. And this is a burgeoning field called machine learning, and you see it at all the conferences, and artificial intelligence. All of these things are part of the new wave of security companies dealing with next-gen defense and predictive modeling.
Boy, now I have too many questions that I want to dive into, but I'll start with this one. When it comes down to the machine learning that you're talking about, a lot of our listeners understand analytics from a video perspective, and now we have these cameras and recording systems that are smart enough to begin taking data of movements, taking data of facial expression or data points from the face for facial recognition. And we utilize the term smart learning, machine learning, as those cameras can become smarter and smarter, and that data becomes more and more useful. Is this very similar in the cyberspace when you talk about the data you're using? At the end of the day, data's data. It's just how you're utilizing it, correct?
Exactly, yeah. A lot of the techniques that have come about in the last decade or so, based on machine learning, not just in the cybersecurity world, but all across businesses when it comes to social media, finance, other type of applications, are due to the massive explosion that you've had in data. And data is the driving force behind improving the accuracy behind a lot of the detective systems that you see in cybersecurity, when you throw massive amounts of data, whether they be software logs, whether they be social media posts, whether they be pictures from a camera, which each photo, as you know, has hundreds of thousands of pixels and many RGB values associated with it. The more and more data you throw at these algorithms, and the more and more you train them what's good and what's bad, or what's right and what's wrong, and what to look for, the better equipped that they become, and the more accurate and more refined that they become over time. And this is especially crucial for cybersecurity applications because the landscape is so dynamic. So, as you know, in cybersecurity, the adversary will evolve. If you stop them one time, it doesn't mean that they're going to be stopped permanently. They're going to keep on trying to find ways around the perimeter defense you've set up or whatever it may be. And so machine learning is especially important in this context because it allows you to adapt your algorithms online to the techniques that the adversary is employing and really try to broaden the defense surface.
Now, we're going to be talking about security specifically today. Did you fall into security just on accident, or did you see this as a science in itself that interested you and you consciously made that move?
To be honest, it was at first pretty purely accidental. It was the fact that my fiance lived in a city, Baltimore, where there's a burgeoning cybersecurity industry. Probably because it's close to DC. There's a lot of cybersecurity companies located there, also out in California, and where you're from, St. Louis as well. But more and more, I saw the opportunity in the industry and the way that people were talking about next-gen solutions and machine learning, and how new it was and how disruptive the technology was in the industry. And it was really appealing from a scientific perspective to try to apply these techniques in this space.
Well, Philip, your specialty tends to lie within the world of social networks, combating security threats that may come from social networks. And I know that many of our listeners have a lot of different opinions when it comes to their activity level on social networks. Some abstain and stay away as far as they can. Some are involved. Some feel that social networks are their worst nightmare based on the way the people in their organization utilize social networks. So there's a wide variety of thought. But I would like to start with just asking, what are some of the real security threats in general? It can be cyber, it can be physical. What are some of the things you see on a regular basis that come directly from social networks?
Right, great question. And just to clarify, when we talk about social networks here, we're talking about the bigger platforms like the Facebooks and Twitters, LinkedIns of the world, and Pinterest and Reddit. Spreading across the digital surface. You have Craigslist, and then you more or less have an online presence that's outside of a company's perimeter, outside of their firewall. Anything that's digital content that can affect you as an individual, or if you belong to an enterprise, the enterprise at large, like the brand. So some of the most common threats that we see threatening enterprises, their CEOs, their C-STAROs, their executives, their employees, and their customers include the distribution of malicious links. So if you put up on your profile that you belong to a certain company, or that you're a customer of a certain company, or that you are the company's brand itself, you become a ripe target for people looking to deliver malicious links. Also, phishing links are very common, and these are both kind of very, very typical cybersecurity use cases. And phishing links are distributed, especially when there's knowledge that a social media user is a customer of a specific company. So if they self-identify, then as soon as you know, let's say that they belong to a bank or they're a member at a specific retail branch, you can go and do more of a targeted spear phishing attack and try to get their credentials. And once you do that, or if you're successful, you can pivot from there and go to their other social and online digital assets, or you can go to their email, etc. We see a lot of scams and different types of social engineering taking place. So this is the type of threat that affects more of the customers. So if I know that you're a customer of a retail or a retail branch or a bank, I can perpetrate a scam in that bank's name. I can impersonate that bank on social media, and I can pretend like I am that bank and try to get you to hand over money, um, which under normal circumstances, banks in this context aren't usually asking for that type of money. But you can use social engineering to try to streamline this process and really convince users that may not know any better. You have different types of threats, whether it be piracy or copyright threats or copyright infringement that entertainment companies have to be concerned about. You have your more typical kind of cyber attacks like botnet attacks and command and control, where we've seen social media be used as a very active surface for command and control due to its scale and the fact that individual posts and individual pieces of content, um, like the fact that a machine is communicating through social media, gets lost in the noise. Um, Social media account takeovers are very common. Right. So most recently, you saw an example actually yesterday for HBO, and Netflix was last month, and Game of Thrones also happened yesterday. So this was a very high profile social media account takeover that was likely due to credential stuffing. So hackers were able to get passwords that they tried on different social assets and pivoted and were able to hack into accounts and post on the behalf of HBO. And so this is kind of a PR nightmare, right? There's a lot of fallout from this, and luckily it was just a pretty innocent post. But in worst case scenario, the hacker, if they have complete control over the account, can literally post on their behalf and start to fool customers and do more malicious things like spread bad links, as I said before.
Hey,
Then you get an oh, yep, sorry.
just real quick, Philip, for the listeners, we're recording today on Friday, August 18th. So for someone that may want to research that exact event that you just spoke about, I want them to be aware if they're listening to this in September or October and go to yesterday, they're not going to find it. So I just wanted to make sure they had the right date to research the event if they choose to do so.
Great, thanks. And yeah, so there are a few other different type of threats that can occur through social media. You have data loss or data theft. So bad users might try to come in outside in and steal data from unknowing users. Alternatively, the users themselves might unknowingly disclose sensitive information about the company that they work for, or specific credentials, or specific, plans or roadmap plans that the company is going to take. With a selfie, diagram might be behind you. You might not realize it when you post it on Instagram, that the world can then see a diagram that you have in the background, or the world can see the ID badge you have on, and smart hackers can take the ID badge, model it, use Photoshop, laminate it, and try to gain physical access to the building you're in, for example, in the worst case. And there's a lot of different things you could do with that. So just the overexposure of personal information at scale. And then, like I said before, there are different techniques that people use on social, like fake domains and typo squatting. So if you're distributing a link that looks like a very recognizable link, like google.com, but instead one of the O's is a zero, or you have a different subdomain, for example, or different indicators within the URL that make it appear like Google, but in reality it's really not. That serves as a really nice disguise to distribute on social media, and a disguise for more malicious content like a phishing or a malware link. And then impersonations is a very big problem. And this is basically when a bad actor will go up and basically take the identity of another social media user. And they can do this despite the fact that social media exists, or they can just copy paste the name. They can download their photo and re-upload it in their own account, and they can get a few followers, make a few connections, get some street cred, and start to perpetrate bad actions in that user's name, despite the fact that they are not necessarily that user.
It just goes on and on and on. It feels like there are so many opportunities of risk, quite frankly, within this social world. Now, let me ask, some of these items you mentioned, I relate strictly to email threats. So how is email and social related in the context of this discussion?
So I like to think of social as an evolution of email, right? Email is usually one to one or one to many if you send out a reply all or very many recipients. But typically those interactions are very private, right? Social, on the other hand, even though you have direct messages, people typically are a lot looser, and they tend to post stuff publicly and for the world to see. So it's not a concentrated group of individuals, a targeted group like you have an email, but it's sitting up there for anyone to navigate to and sit up there for a long time and potentially be vulnerable to, right? Now, in that sense, email requires an extra action. A lot of email filters already exist, whether or not you know it. If you have a Gmail account, a lot of the spam that you're getting is being automatically put into your spam box. And this kind of filters, even though the social networks are continually taking content down, again, the new threats that come out, these filters aren't necessarily there. So content is sitting up there a lot longer. Email is also a bit more stale in the security sense. Nigerian print scams, and other type of classical email threats are pretty well known to people even outside of the cybersecurity space. You're typically not, if you're an educated user, you're typically not going to go up and click on links within emails from people or other users that you've never interacted with before. People are generally pretty cautious now because the problem has been around for a long time. Social media, on the other hand, users, because they see friendly faces and they see profiles, they see their parents or their friends, they place the trust in that rather than in the network to do the job, and they're a lot more susceptible. The culture of trust and safety from a user point of view is not as mature.
One of the things that really jumps out to me when I think about social versus email is many of us now are familiar with phishing attacks, specifically when it comes to our email accounts at a corporation. We've undergone our training, and although mistakes are still made, we at least understand what it is. And then you mentioned another term called spear phishing. And before I really dive into the question, we might want to describe the difference between phishing and spear phishing, because I never want to assume our listeners know all the language. So where I'm going with the question, and we'll define those, is this. It seems like social media really opens up the door specifically for spear phishing because of all the data we as users tend to release because of our trusting nature within these networks.
Exactly. Yeah. So to start off, phishing versus spear phishing is undirected. It's a campaign that is spammed out to many, many users, typically associated with email, but now much more recently growing threat on social media, where the whole intended idea is to steal someone's credentials. And so I can put up a link on Twitter that once you click through, looks like you've accidentally logged out of Twitter. So it'll ask you, just like the Twitter login screen would, and it'll be a direct copy of that. It'll ask you to input your username and your password. Now, of course, this isn't the normal Twitter site. This is a bad actor's backend. And once you input those credentials, you can guarantee that that account is no longer going to be under your control. Right? So the goal is to steal credentials. And the difference between phishing and spear phishing is that phishing is undirected and it's spammed out, and it's just a very wide blast. You don't care necessarily about specifically targeting an individual. You care more about the fact that you're going to send it out to so many people that a few are going to bite, and those few are going to make your attack worthwhile. Right? You don't have to have a very high click-through rate or a very high success rate. You just get lucky enough at the time that this is still a very worthwhile attack. Spear phishing, on the other hand, you do a lot more research up front, and like you said, there's a lot more research to be done on social media, which is a great surface to do recon on, because people tend to post very personal information about their jobs, about what they did last week, about their vacation plans, about their children, about their family, about their friends. And so there's a lot of information there that can be leveraged against that person in a targeted attack, in order to gain their trust and in order to make the stealing of their credentials much easier. And so you put a lot more effort up front to really make the accuracy and the success rate of your attack much higher. And typically, spear phishing is done um, performed on much higher value users. So you would do spear phishing, and you would go after executives, you would go after IT guys, recruiters, people who have access within an enterprise to very personal and sensitive information like salaries, like credit card numbers, maybe like social security numbers and stuff like this.
Now, we recently had an episode where we focused specifically on social engineering. Spear phishing and social engineering, to me, go hand in hand. Again, it's the information gathering that's useful for both. Would you agree with that?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, I would say spear phishing is one basically use case that you can use social engineering for. Yeah.
Now, a good portion of our listeners are physical security managers rather than the cyber side. And so I really want to try to take this conversation and focus on how social sites, social media can really impact the protection of the physical assets of a company, how it can impact the physical uh, aspects of the buildings, as well as actually how it can impact the users themselves or the employees that we're trying to protect. One of the interesting aspects you spoke about when we were talking about threats was if a employee is taking a selfie and they post something out there and it happens to have their ID, that someone theoretically could copy that ID and get into a physical facility, maybe not by using that badge with the card reader, but maybe by backdooring with someone else who doesn't know any different and lets them right in the building. Can you think of some other threats to physical buildings, to the employees that really do come from social media?
Right. That's a good example. And so that's kind of more of a very creative example. And you could think of much more direct examples when you think of a physical security threat. Um, let's say you are part of a maybe politically or just generally controversial organization that tends to be in the news a lot because they're famous or because they get politicized in the media for whatever reason. As an organization, you're going to tend to be targeted a lot more, maybe by violent threats. And so social media can give you a step up and maybe some advanced notification of a violent threat that's being waged against you. Now, whether or not that threat is real or not is an open question, and that's kind of more of a philosophical debate of free speech. And is the threat made on digital media? Is that punishable? Can I go through law enforcement to deal with that individual or not? But in any case, having alerts like this and having alerts of potentially threatening events that are going on in and around areas that you have physical assets in can help security managers allocate resources much more effectively.
I guess, you specialize in taking the data points and analyzing the actual risk coming from those data points. As a security manager, what can I do or what should I be looking for to help, again, protect against the risk that my organization may be facing due to some of the different aspects going on in the social space? Is there anything I can even do about this?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as there are some manual controls or there are some manual processes that you can go through. If you're an enterprise or if you're trying to protect a physical building or at the headquarters of your company or an offsite event or something like this, or even the physical safety of an executive of your company who's going on a pre-planned business trip, who's taking specific flights, etc. Anything that is publicly accessible can be found, and threats can be made against them. And so the things that you can do is through social search bars, you can simply type in certain things like threats that might be waged, like attack or the word kill or the word destroy or the word bomb, and other things like this in conjunction with the name of your company. And the social network search bars go so far, and there are very many social networks, and it's a very kind of heterogeneous space. So this is kind of very arduous in a way, but it is something that you can do to get some access to information. But it's not only just that it's so heterogeneous, but the landscape is constantly shifting, right? So you have lots of at one point in time, maybe you're not likely to be threatened, but maybe next week when you're holding this big offsite event, then the stakes are higher, and for some reason or another, there are individuals that want to threaten you over social media because of this event, right? And so these kind of combination of things argue for more of an automated solution. And the automated solution would be to basically try to detect these instances as they crop up and provide a systematic alert catalog for a security manager or for whoever's in charge of physical security at the organization. And there are also, very difficult problems associated with this. It kind of gets back to the background that I have in dealing with big data sets, because a lot of times when you think about violent threats and violent types of language, it doesn't necessarily go far enough. So just because I say the word kill in a sentence, just like the one I just uttered, doesn't necessarily mean that I'm making a threat. It certainly indicates more than another randomly chosen sentence that I can look in a book that might provide evidence that there's more violent intent. But for sure, you can't say that every sentence containing the word kill is violent. We use kill a lot in our culture colloquially. We use it, he really killed that ball if you're talking about a baseball game. We say destroy in a very positive context sometimes. And so what you end up if you start to do a very ad hoc solution like that is being flooded with false positives, stuff that is just noise and that you don't really care about. So a lot of times what you can do, and especially leveraging these machine learning techniques, is to not only take into account specific words like kill and destroy and blow up and words of intention like I'm gonna and different verbs like that. You can take into account other features, or what we call in this parlance of machine learning, other features of text and images to extract more meaning from these type of posts in social media and basically provide more accurate alerts for the security manager. For example, another indicator for violence on social media is, let's say, a lot of consecutive capital letters in a sentence, right? When you read lots of capital letters like that in a text or on social media, the intended perception is that the person who's typing or has typed that is screaming, right? They're yelling while they're typing, right? This is kind of the way that we perceive capital letters consecutively. And so there's a little bit more anger expressed, there's a little bit more frustration expressed, perhaps, unless you're an unexperienced user with caps lock on. But this is typically, again, it can provide a little bit more evidence and dial up the probability that that maybe in conjunction with other violent terms and intentions indicates a more pertinent threat. You can also go to the level of sentiment analysis. And so a lot of the types of threats that you might come across can be considered totally benign. Like it's very difficult to be able to tell whether or not someone is being sarcastic when they post a threat like this on social media. And so when you start to get into the sentiment, you can really start to tease apart the intention of the user. You can look at their previous history. Is this an anomaly, for example? And there's a lot of other syntactical elements on social media and digital channels that indicate more violence, right? So like emojis, for example, if you have maybe a gun emoji or a knife emoji or a fire emoji in your social media post, that indicates a little bit more violence and anger and frustration. Again, this kind of pushes you more in the favor that this given post is violent compared to another one. And so there's a lot of different things that you can weigh, and you can do this in a very automated fashion online and you can get a result back that is a lot more accurate and a lot more fast than if you were to go back and try to do this in a more ad hoc way by just saying, okay, look for the word kill, look for the word destroy.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I'm thinking to myself, who has time for all of this?
Right. Right. I mean, especially if you're a popular organization with a lot of followers or get a lot of traffic on social media because you have strong marketing or whatever the reason may be, the amount of effort it takes to sift through all the data and all the different users that are talking about you, it demands automation. It just doesn't scale for the single analyst. Social is so big now, and it's such an important part of the way that businesses deal with the public through marketing and even direct selling, that it really merits an automated approach, especially ones that are accurate, like these type of machine learning approaches.
And I assume this is exactly why ZeroFox is in business.
Yep. For I couldn't have said it better myself, but these are the type of issues that we're seeing. So both for the physical security manager and for the brand manager and for the marketing manager and for the cybersecurity person within the organization, there's a lot of different issues that social media presents, a lot of different risks, and the idea is to be able to give customers information and provide them accurate and actionable alerts in the form of these posts and accounts that might be threatening, and then to subsequently have them remediated and taken down off the social networks so that they no longer are exposing the organization in question to any risks.
Let's talk about social networks a little bit, specifically social profiles. I mentioned earlier that a good portion of the listening audience are physical security managers. A good portion of those have come from a law enforcement background. Maybe they served in the FBI or military. But there's a level of privacy and skepticism among most of those in our field of work. The question I have will revolve it around executives. But based on your knowledge of these threats, what is common out there in our social world, should executives have a social profile or not?
It's a really good question, and it's kind of fundamental to the way that my team thinks about issues coming from social, right? Because an easy answer to the question might be, oh, there's all these risks that I listed before. Why even bother? What's the point of it all? I mean, it's great to have marketing and to engage with customers, perhaps, but in the end, if I'm going to get exposed to some risk, maybe we just do it through a different way. Now, the problem that might crop up there is that your choice to disengage with the networks doesn't necessarily leave you totally immune to risks, because it's just as easy for somebody to go up and assume your identity without your knowledge or without your active participation, and to take some images off of Google Images, image search, take some nice description that you have publicized on your website, or even assume the identity of your executives and your CEO or some of your key employees, and get a fake picture, get some followers, build up credibility, and start to engage as if you were actually that person. Meanwhile, to that person's totally unbeknownst to that person, you have someone up there impersonating you and perhaps engaging in some illicit activity like malware distribution or phishing customers and other things that, from an outsider's perspective, seems legitimate because there's a profile I can associate with the company. There's an official handle. Of course, they'll have a social network account. Might as well engage. But meanwhile, you have someone up there that's perpetrating bad things in your name. And it actually, what we've seen is that companies that have less social media engagement tend to be targeted even more than companies that do have social engagement.
Very
so it's not
interesting.
it's not necessarily, at least in terms of per capita or general rate, right? And so this is definitely a big problem, and not engaging with the platforms is not the answer.
So you might recommend at least creating a profile, um, creating some connections or reaching out for some connections to show that you are out there. You don't have to be actively involved. You don't need to be posting every day or taking a bunch of selfies and putting them out there, but at least having a profile is recommended.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think if you're, especially if you're an executive, or if your company is, is popular at all, or getting good traction and good business, and is getting a reputation, then you have to engage, and you have to go up there, and you have to make sure that other people aren't exploiting your brand for bad reasons, right? Because these type of things, all of a sudden you could be strewn across the front pages of a newspaper claiming that you did something that you didn't necessarily do. And so for at least the big social networks, the Facebooks and LinkedIn and Twitters, you should have some semblance of a digital presence there.
Well, I'm looking at the time, and as always, these conversations go by so fast. And I want to ask you one question that I believe every listener is actually thinking to himself right now. I believe they're thinking, wow, I've listened to this entire episode, and the one question I have has not been asked yet. So here it is. I have a social profile. How do I actually protect my individual account from being hacked?
It's a good question. There are a lot of different things you can do, both from a common sense security perspective and from a social media specific perspective. So, as the typical advice goes, don't use 123 ABC as your password. Don't use QWERTY as your password. Use some creativity, insert some numbers, some different casing of the letters, some special characters to make it not easily guessable. Right? This is security 101. And secondarily, you don't want to share passwords between any of the accounts or online personas that you have, and that includes email, and that includes your banks, and that includes any other access point that you've used. Because what will happen is that there'll be a big breach and a big dump of data online. For example, this happened to LinkedIn in 2014, where social passwords or different types of passwords will get shared. And this is accessible. You can go up and download, and you can access the Tor where these passwords are available. And so attackers can use a technique called credential stuffing to take those passwords and try them verbatim on your other accounts that you're associated with. They might look at your photo, or they might look at the username that you've put up as your persona, and come to the conclusion that it's the same one that's from the breach, and try the password or try slight variations of that password. And this is an easy way to get your account hacked. So a very nice service that I'd recommend is actually checking a website called Have I Been Pwned? And there are a few other websites like this out there that basically, if you have a username that you tend to use across different social networks or online personas, it'll indicate to you if it's ever been exposed in some type of large scale breach like that. And so just generally practicing good security hygiene in this sense. Then you can also, highly recommended users should go out there, and for every single one of their social accounts nowadays, they provide a service, two-factor authentication. And so, instead of just logging into your account with just your password, your plain text password, two-factor will require you to log in through a device that you have on your person. And they can either do that using a phone number that you provide, so you'll get a text with a secondary code that allows you to access the social network, or you can use some other authentication service that'll allow you to generate a code to access the social network. But this is a very good practice in general, and so definitely recommend two or multi-factor authentication for all of your social networks.
You definitely reminded me of another episode I'm going to have to do, and that's all about the dark web, because some will laugh, but I have to admit that I did not even know it existed until about this last year. And I don't believe I'm alone. It's a whole nother area and realm that I think many are not even aware exist, but that's where a lot of the, we'll call it dark activity, can happen.
Absolutely. Right. And this is, this is the kind of place that's not indexed by websites like Google, but and you can't just Google the website and find it on your browser. But there'll be a breeding ground for password selling and account selling. Um, and I mean, social network accounts and email accounts, depending on their perceived value, will get sold by the dozens or by the hundreds for a certain price. And so there is an underground market for these type of accounts, and it's pretty active. So this isn't that indicates that it's an ongoing threat, and it's a threat that people can actually make money off of too, right? So this increases the value beyond the initial intention, which might be to steal from a customer or deal direct damage. And this is more of like a broader type of damage that can be performed.
Philip, one other thing I just want to briefly talk about, again, because I think it's of interest to the listeners as they protect their personal accounts or maybe their family's personal accounts. I was able to hear you speak at ShowMeCon here in St. Louis, and one of the things that you mentioned, and it was just like an aha moment for me, and luckily I've never done this, but you talked about how we need to be aware of those my 25 favorite things surveys or 7 things about me or all of those particular things that fly around Facebook that ultimately expose a lot of the personal information that often is used in passwords. Can you expand on that just quickly?
Absolutely, yeah. So as anyone who's used social media knows, there is this psychological incentive for us to seek out social credibility and social acceptance, right? I don't necessarily post for this reason, but there is a nice feeling you get when you post something and you get retweeted or liked or plus one or upvoted, and you get a lot of likes. I mean, this is vanity. This is human nature. We're vain. We want social validation and acceptance. We want to promote ourselves, and more we're becoming our own brands. And so the type of stuff that you see coming across Facebook, whether it be self-posted by yourself or if you're filling out a form that's asking very personal questions, like the type of security questions that you might come up with for a login to Amazon or Google, like your mother's maiden name, your first high school dance or date, the name of your college, etc. These type of questions, avoid entering these into any of these kind of queries. The social acceptance and the likes that you'll get out of publishing something to your timeline like this do not outweigh the risks that you're putting yourself through. And there's other kind of more basic examples of this. So you can think more about the fact that you're gonna go on vacation. You're really excited to go on a trip to Europe or to Asia somewhere, and so you're posting it in excitement. Or better yet, you get internet while you're on vacation and you're uploading Instagram photos in minute by minute because you want to share it with your friends. I'm having a great time. This, if you're with your family and someone, God forbid, has been stalking you for some reason or another, or you're a VIP or you're targeted, it's a great indicator. It's okay. You're not home for this week. You're in another country. And so there's been many examples in the news of people doing this and having either their homes broken into or having their property damaged or otherwise vandalized and stuff like this. So this stuff does happen, and it does happen more often than you'd think.
Philip, I thank you for going into that. I know the intent and goal was really to stay focused on the impact of these social networks on organizations and physical security. At the same time, I know that this is real to all of us, and we are all navigating our social lives now. And although it feels like it's been around forever, I personally feel like it's still evolving and always changing. So I, again, appreciate you just taking some time and talking on the personal level to all of us.
Absolutely, not a problem. Yeah, and the more social media grows in popularity and the more that our eyes are glued to our screens, and the more that the physical and the digital world start to coalesce, the greater these risks are going to be, and the more you might to see them crop up in the news. And so I think it's just great for people to hear about these type of problems and just be generally aware.
Well, as we near the very end of the episode, we may have some listeners that are interested in connecting with you, maybe connecting with your company, ZeroFox. Can you tell us the best ways to reach out to you and connect after this episode?
Sure. If you'd like to connect to me specifically, you can find me on Twitter at PH So that's the first two letters of my first name, Philip, and my last name, Tully. And then if you'd like to find out more about the type of company I work for, ZeroFox, and the type of products we offer, please feel free to navigate to zerofox.com or visit us on social media again, at ZeroFox on any of the major social networks.
Well, Philip, I end by saying I really can't thank you enough. The content of this episode was invaluable. It was relevant, again, to both the organization and us as individuals. I thank you for taking your time and look forward to seeing the next time you're speaking and I get to be a guest in your audience.
Great. Thank you so much, Scott. I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks.